No? Okay, then. I told you last week we introduced you to two little Irish fellows named Donald and Connell, right? All right.
And Patrick.
And Patrick. All right. I clicked the clicker and it's not. Start it for me. That'll work. Yeah, go ahead and turn it off. But don't
Okay, Patrick, tell us a bit more about this atheism thing. Yeah, Patrick, tell us.
Certainly, yes. Well, you see, in ancient times, people like you invented stories about various gods creating the earth and mankind because you lacked the scientific knowledge necessary to understand the origins of the universe. But in my day, thanks to scientific progress, we do understand these things, and so it's no longer necessary for us to fool ourselves into thinking that some silly god created us.
But what about all that stuff that defies scientific explanation? Isn't that evidence of God's existence? Yeah, riddle us that, Patrick.
Stuff like what?
Well, how about the multitude of miracles in the Bible, chief among them the resurrection of our Lord Jesus?
Oh, you sweet little simpletons, people don't rise from the dead.
Except for that one time Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah, that was awesome.
No, what I'm saying is that Jesus never rose from the dead.
And how do you know that, Patrick?
Because it's not possible for people to rise from the dead.
Yeah, we know. That's why it was sort of a big deal when Jesus rose from the dead.
Look, I think you're far too uneducated to understand this, but if people could rise from the dead, then people would rise from the dead. If Jesus could rise from the dead, surely someone else would have risen from the dead as well.
Other people have risen from the dead.
Like who?
Like all the people in the Bible who rose from the dead because Jesus rose them from the dead not long before he himself rose from the dead.
Well, obviously you can't count those examples.
Why not, Patrick?
Because they come from the Bible, and the Bible is a ridiculous book full of silly stories that couldn't possibly happen, like...
People rising from the dead?
Exactly.
Right. So according to you, the resurrection doesn't prove the existence of God because it never happened. And we know it never happened because we know that people can't rise from the dead. And we know that people can't rise from the dead because no one ever has risen from the dead, if you don't count all the people who have risen from the dead. I think I'm onto your little trick here, Patrick. Yeah, you're a sneaky little secularist, Patrick. So your strategy for proving the non-existence of God is to systematically rule out every piece of evidence for the existence of God solely because that evidence could be used to prove the existence of God. What a perfectly reasonable use of the scientific method, Patrick. Yeah, we'd love to see you employ this strategy in the laboratory, Patrick. Hey, Connell, I just proved that there's no such thing as barium. And how'd you do that, Donald? By throwing out all the samples of barium. I'm surprised more defense attorneys don't attempt this in the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have conclusively proven to you that my client is innocent, as long as you ignore the murder weapon, his confession, and the 400 witnesses who saw him stab that guy in the face.
Look, clearly you're not enlightened enough to understand what...
I mean, really, Patrick. By your logic, the first president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod could prove himself to be the best-looking man in the world. All he'd have to do is lock every other male on the planet in his dressing room right before the beauty pageant begins.
Oh, no, even then I would still lose.
So I may not be a scientist, Patrick. I may not possess your superior intellect and education. I may even be a superstitious Neanderthal who thinks that thunder is what happens when God yells at leprechauns. I think it's the result of a shockwave in the air due to the sudden thermal expansion of plasma in the lightning channel, but that's because I'm stupid. Nonetheless, I still know a lame argument when I hear one. And when you accuse Christians of remaining in ignorance because they refuse to allow any evidence to challenge their theistic worldview, only to dismiss every eyewitness account of our Lord's resurrection solely because it challenges your atheistic worldview, well, that's not just lame, it's also a wee bit of the clover calling the grass green. That's an adorable Celtic twist on a classic idiom, Patrick.
Don't be absurd. I treat the Bible exactly the way I treat everything else. I'm a man of reason and evidence and facts. I'm a man of science, a world-renowned evolutionary biologist. I defy you to give me one example of something that I believe in despite no scientist ever having seen it happen.
Evolution.
Dang it. But really, have you actually read your holy book? Your God is a heartless, hateful, murderous ogre. There's no reason to believe in such a vile deity.
I'm sorry, Patrick. I'm going to need a second to recover from that. Yeah, Patrick, stop in the name of logic before you break my brain. Placing your failure to properly understand the justice of the Almighty aside for a moment, did you honestly just argue that God doesn't exist because he's mean? Why, if being a jerk made you cease to exist, then every war in human history would have been over the second it started. Rosie O'Donnell would have disappeared in a puff of smoke in 1998 instead of getting fired from The View once every 7 minutes. And that jerk who makes those Lutheran satire videos wouldn't even be able to finish recording.
Now, your argument's a little bit overly simplistic, but I like to show these. They're humorous. We're talking about man tonight, and we will see Donald and Connell again. The guy, I mean, they're a hit. They're like a YouTube cult classic, and the guy's killing them off. I don't know why. So we're talking about man tonight, right? When we talk about man, what typically is the question most people ask about man when we start to? What do you think it might be? Well, that would be one question about man. Okay, what about another question about man?
Who is man that thou art mindful of?
Okay, that's a great one. As a matter of fact, the guy we show here in a minute, don't start yet, is going to address that. What else? Because it's in par with what Elaine is talking about, but it's something, typically everyone asks this question because it is a quandary and there's really not a satisfactory answer at times for it.
What would have happened in the Garden of Eden if Eve had eaten and Adam hadn't?
I don't know. Under the position I hold, Adam and Eve must sin. So, yeah. I mean, God would have killed Eve and started again, I guess. That would be one way of looking at it.
Because that is the question people have asked.
That is. How about this one? What is the image of God?
Man.
Now, what does that mean to be the image bearer of God, right? That's the one I almost always get asked.
That is a very big question.
It is. And I'm going to disappoint you, but not right now.
Is man the physical image of God or the spiritual image?
Uh-huh, yeah. And I'm going to disappoint you with that one. Roll the videotape for me there, brother. Is it good for me? Okay.
The first thing I want to remind you of this is that we are told according.
If you get a chance, if you have YouTube and you really want to watch somebody that is on his game theologically, now understand, he guns over my head, but the parts that he brings down for all of us to pick, he is brilliant. And what I love about Ravi Zacharias is that he was a Hindu before he was a Christian. So when people start coming at him with Eastern philosophy, he slaughters them wholesale. It is so much fun to watch him take people on. Well, you know, sir, Hindus believe such and such. And I watched him one time, he goes, no, they don't. And then began to explain to them what Hindus really do believe, and then told him why he left Hinduism and became a Christian. He is brilliant to watch. So,
To the scriptures prior to the resurrection story that God is the author of human essence. God is the author in the essential nature of our humanity. We didn't come into being by accident. We just didn't suddenly appear unconceived or without any purpose in mind, but that God himself is the designer and brought us into existence. The psalmist says, when I see the heavens, the work of your hands, the sun and the moon and the stars which you have made, what is there in man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you visit him? This fact of our creation is a vital source in enabling us to understand what it means to be human. It's a vital source, giving us the generality of our essence, created in the image of God. Some of you have probably heard me mention this simple conversation between Jesus and the one who was questioning him, trying to pit him against the Caesar. And he looked at Jesus and he said, is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar? The one question I wish so desperately Jesus had answered differently. Then on April 15th, you could be godly and rebellious at the same time. Jesus, so brilliant in his response, he says, give me a coin. And he took the coin and he says, whose image do you see on this? The man says, Caesar. Jesus says, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give to God that which is God's. The disingenuousness of the questioner is noticed in the fact that he did not come back with a second question. He should have said, what belongs to God? And Jesus would have said, whose image is on you? Give to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. Give to God that which belongs to God. God's image is on you.
What does it mean for the image of God to be on an individual? Well, I can tell you that there's a lot of ink that has been utilized to discuss this topic. Some would say that it's a physical form. Well, you run into a problem with that. John tells us that God is Spirit, and we worship Him in spirit and in truth. Now, the only person of the triune God that has physical form is Jesus, and we know that He has also appeared in physical form in the Old Testament repeatedly. I can give you multiple examples. So does it necessarily mean that the image of God is a physical form? No. Could. You would have, because here's the thing, word image there could also be the used word likeness. And so, does that help? Not really. So let me ask you another question. Could it be a spiritual image? Could it be something about us internally? Well, here's the thing. In our current state, is that possible? Or could it be a physical? Let me ask y'all, could it be physical? What do you think? No one?
We do give Him attributes that are like physical man.
Yeah. We do talk of God with having hands and eyes, and it's all anthropomorphic language that's utilized to just give physical. That's right. Matter of fact, since someone let's throw out here Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 30, chapter 2, 5 and 7. If you want to read 6, that's great too. And let's look at chapter 2, 18 through 22, and then I'll look at chapter 3. If I copied it, I'll bring up my text. Talk about some of the things that make man, interestingly, the image of God, because there's some language around the God or man that is unique to man itself, which is why when people ask me where do dogs go, where do pets go when they die, I say pets go in the ground and they die. People don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. Why? Because there's something unique about man that's different than animals. Very unique about man. The text records the uniqueness about man in a very unique way. So, and also, we are the image bearer. So, let's look. Does somebody have 1:26 through 30? Okay, Miss Elaine, if you wouldn't mind.
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished His work that He had done. I'm not reading that.
1:26. That's okay.
We'll try this again. 26.
Yes, ma'am.
Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created them, male and female He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. And you shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so.
Okay. That's good. Did it help? Did it answer our quest? It says that he created man in his image. And here in this passage, one of the things about Hebrew literature is it gives a broad overstatement and then it goes back to define the broad overstatement. So a lot of people go, well, see, here he created both male and female. So we get over to chapter 2, God recreates male and female. No, that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit with what's going on. You see Paul doing this in the New Testament. Paul will give a big, broad overstatement, and then notice how he narrows it back down into a very narrow statement. And so, you know, there's a lot of people that try to make a lot of hay out of this. So,
Doesn't the very first says, in our image, that plural, and that shows the Trinity?
well, there is a plurality there, and we Christians would say, yes, it does. However, there are Jews that would say, no, it's the royal we. And my question then would be, this is one of the few places in the text where you could make the case for royal we, and the other one is pretty weak too. So why would a deity use the royal we?
I think also, you know, this answers the question that I asked you.
Yeah.
In the fact that we're made in their image, according to their likeness. It uses both image and likeness.
It does. It does.
And image, you know, the image thing could be, like I asked you, the difference between spiritual and physical. And the image could be the spiritual portion and the likeness of the physical portion.
You could if you look at those two words synonymously, or as two distinct things, or if you're looking at them as descriptive attributes of the same kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? And that can happen. The very big, great explosion. In English, we wouldn't use that many modifiers, would we? The big explosion. Hebrew will utilize several modifiers. Matter of fact, in the book of Jonah, when it talks about Nineveh, the phraseology for Nineveh, it says, get up and go to Nineveh, the great city, the great one, the great city of Nineveh. We don't write that way. If we were to write that way, every English teacher would slaughter me, even though in the Hebrew, it's to put that many modifiers, and it's designed for emphasis. Emphasis. It's designed to give emphasis to the speciality. Because I'm going to show you something here in a second where I think more along the line of not a physical representation, but a unique representation. Right? Let us take...
He says it 3 times in that 27.
He does.
If you're a parent, you may say, shut the door, shut the door, shut the door, clean your room, clean your room, clean your room. And the more you say it, the more you emphasize it. And that's the way he does with us and his children.
I think it has a lot to do with emphasis. I think chapter... Who's got 2, 5, 6, and 7? Si?
No bush of the field rejecting the land, and no small plant of the field gets sprung up. The Lord God is untouched the rain over the plant, and there is no man to work the ground. And mist was going up from the land, and was watering the whole face of the land. And the Lord formed the man, the dust, and the ground, and the breath of life. And again came the living creature.
Living creature. Who has something different? The NASB, I think, has living being. Correct? All right. All right. You have a living soul. What translation are you using? King James. Okay. Holman Christian Standard, King James. All right. Living being, living creature, living soul. What do you think it is? How many think it's living being? NASB translates living being. How many think it's... It is, but there's something unique here. There's a lot of other stuff going on here. Living creature. Okay? How about living soul? The translation directly word for word is living soul. They use living being and they use living creature at times to convey, as Elaine says, there's more to it than just being a soul. It's not a disembodiment. It's a being with a soul. And it's designed to carry, but it's a living soul. Notice that phraseology is never used of any created animal. Man also has something uniquely done. God says, let there be, and these animals exist, correct? What does God do unique to man? He breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and man becomes a living being. He becomes a being possessing a soul.
But he also formed him.
He also formed him. That's right. That's right.
You know, I've been teaching, hopefully not wrong,
Yeah?
the children in Good News Club about in creation, God actually only physically created two things.
Okay.
Everything else He spoke into existence. Now, you know, if you want to consider that creation, but you think of the definition of creation of making something.
Yeah. Okay.
And the two things He actually physically made was man and woman.
Yes. The others he creates by what we call fiat command.
Right.
I speak it and it exists. The others he forms, he makes. You have some good ground to be upon. I think you have. There would be some that would disagree with you. I'm not one of them, but there'd be some that would disagree with you, even in conservative camps. I think you're on good ground because there's something unique in this story that is not like the creation narrative of all the others. He speaks the animals into being. He causes the plants to grow. But man is created uniquely. So you had a question. But did I answer your question?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Because that's what makes us special to God.
That's what makes us unique.
And we were created for fellowship.
Yep.
With God.
Yep. Now, hold on. You're getting ahead of me because I'm going to catch up with you. Okay. Brother Si, what was it?
The Lord God planted a garden.
Yep.
Physically did something else.
Yep. Well, planted a garden in Eden, but that's after he's already spoke the garden into existence. You see, so that's how I would read that in the East. And he put man who he formed, or put in it man who he formed. So he's made this garden. Now after creating man, what does he do with this thing, stuff that he's created in all the animals? He's take man and goes, plant your flag. So, yep.
Animals have go by instinct.
Yes.
You can walk up, if a lion is eating a full meal and he's full, you can probably walk up and pet him like a big house cat. Where, like man, his instinct says, I'm full, I don't need to kill this person that's walking up to me.
Yeah.
But man, if he kills, say, like Abel and Cain, there was remorse that he killed his brother.
Yes. I see where you're...
But we have this soul.
I see where you're heading. Absolutely. There's an aspect about what we do that carries with it the concept of remorsefulness and memory and violation of the things of God. Sure. Yes. Now, man becomes a living creature. Man becomes a living soul. Something unique about man. The breath of life is breathed into the nostril of man. He's formed man. Now, here's the thing. When you asked, is it physical form or spiritual? The answer, in a lot of cases, is yes. We don't know exactly the physical form that man is created in, but we know Christ takes physical form, and he appears as we, well, not appears, he is as we are. He's the God-man. Now, fully God. Fully man. That's why we use the God-man terminology. Now, that being said, as I take a sip, that image that we bear is designed, as someone pointed out, for fellowship. He plants us in the garden. What does man and woman have with God every day? They commune with God naturally, correct? And so, especially if you look at a lot of what the Reformers put forth, because when you start looking, going back in some of the patristic area stuff, again, there is a lot of allegory that comes with this, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong. The allegory is not wrong. If you notice, Paul used allegory if you looked in Galatians. Allegory is not wrong. Bad allegory, yeah, wrong all day long. I listened to a sermon where a guy allegorized the story of Zacchaeus, that Zacchaeus climbed the tree not because he was short in stature, but because he was short in faith. Unfortunately, the text said what? He was a little man. So he climbed a tree because he was short. Every 3-year-old knows that, but apparently that guy decided he would take a new twist on Zacchaeus, and I'm sitting here putting my head in my hands going, please stop, you are hurting me. Bad preaching is like fingernails down a chalkboard on steroids in stereo. For me. For some people, it just doesn't bother them. For me, it just makes me violently ill. So anyhow, so God creates man. He puts the image upon him. He puts something upon man. Whether it's a physical upon or a spiritual upon, we have that. But then something changes, does it not? In the relationship between God and man. Sin. Absolutely. Genesis chapter 3. Let's pop over here and take a look at this. Up to Genesis chapter 3, I would say. Now the serpent was more craftier than any other beast of the field that the God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. The Superman woman said to the woman, you shall not surely die, for God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Yes, that's true. You will know good and evil. He doesn't lie to them. He just doesn't give them the full scope of the knowing of good and evil, does he? So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that was a delight to the eyes, okay, both of those are kind of quasi-acceptable, and this is the best one, the tree was to be desired to make one wise. She took and she ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were open, as the serpent promised, and they knew they were naked. Something had shifted within the nature of man, did it not? The knowledge of what sin was and the weight of what sin carried. They sewed fig leaves together and made for themselves loincloths. And they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden. Notice, see, you had this relationship. Still kind of do. In the cool of the day, and man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord. I love that. I love that line. It's like my kids when they were young hiding behind the curtain, the big long curtains with their feet sticking out from underneath it. Oh yeah, Daddy played along, just like God does. Where are you? Are you behind the door? Oh, are you behind the oak tree, Adam? No, you're not there. Are you hiding behind the giraffes? No, where are you? The Lord called the man and said, where are you? And he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Isn't that the common response when we sin? We hide from God. We run from God. We break fellowship with God. Check that out. And he said to you, who told you you were naked?
But he knew.
He knew. It's kind of like when I was young, I had an affinity for playing with fire. And I was left at home one time by myself, and my mom came in, and she could smell the sulfur, because matches always give off a very unique smell. And she goes, all right, Ashley. And I said, I didn't strike any matches. Oops. Yeah, I told on myself, so now I couldn't back out of it with a clever lie. So now I'm stuck, right? I heard the sound of you because I hid myself because we were naked. Whoa. How did you know you were naked? This was not knowledge that you had prior till. So how do you now have this knowledge? What? Who told you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to? And people look at this and they read this and go, see, God didn't know what was going on. I ask my kids these questions all the time, even though I know what happened. Did you hit your sister? Well, I can see the red mark on the other child. I can hear one wailing and the other one hiding. I know what happened. I don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to put 2 and 2 together. And if y'all been parents, you know what's happened too, right? And you ask these questions not because you're clueless, but because you're seeing what they'll do. You eat nothing. Yes, he did. And he said, the woman which you gave me. Then the woman looked and said, the snake deceived me, and the serpent was left without any legs. Did you get that joke? The man blamed the woman blamed the snake, and the snake didn't have a leg to stand on.
We got it.
Because curse is to go on his belly. Adam blamed God. Adam has some serious gall. You know, God, everything was great until you made her. I was tooling along, naming animals, and she gave me this woman that you gave me. She gave to me and I ate. So really, I ate because you made her. Therefore, it's your fault.
In reality, if Adam was there with you, he could have stopped her.
Could have. Yeah. So here's why yes, and so yes. So before we
Another interesting thing.
Yeah.
I think that Adam really, he fell in love with her the first time he saw her. If you can just imagine, the guy's never seen her before, and he sees this beautiful woman, and he knew what God was. He might not have understood it like a Bible scholar does, but he did know who God was, and had been talking with him, and he knew God's characteristics, and he thought, if I tell about her, or if I don't eat this apple, God will take her away.
Well, that's a possibility. The thing is who changes the law that God gives Adam? Because clearly there's an alteration within the law. Don't touch. And so that's certainly an aspect, and it's more an argument for silence. I look at it that they both listened to the statement of the devil. They looked at the fruit, and they both were enticed for the wisdom aspect. The lie that was given to them is, you will be God.
Is there an implication that they were both present at the time?
Yes.
That Eve ate of the apple? She didn't eat it and then go take it to him?
No, I think the text gives the implication. So you may be right, and I might be right. Because he says, and she took and she ate and gave to the man who was there with her. And so the timing of that sentence seems to indicate that it wasn't she took, she ate, and she waited. Man was there with her. He witnessed with his eyes. And so for me, I lean towards the idea that they believed the fruit would give them godlike power. I mean, think about it. How many of you would like to be, I would love to be a superhero with lightning bolt ability when people come blowing through the parking lot of the church. Wah! And then the car would be gone and the person is there and now they've got to walk. Right? Or you're behind that annoying, or that person's in front of you and you wish that you could just like, move to the right. And just Jedi, I mean, think about it. Look at the movies we watch. Well, Jedi mind powers. Iron Man, he's a brilliant guy. He builds a suit that makes him superhuman. I get some gamma radiation, now I turn green and Hulk must smash. I got a hammer that gives me the enchantment ability to cast lightning and thunder at people because I'm the god of thunder and I can whip that dude around like it's a tack hammer and crush people. See, we like the stories of the supernatural power. We are driven to those powers. There's a lust almost within us that kind of lean towards godlike abilities. Go ask a doctor. You know, that's one of the complaints that people go, well, doctors think that. Not all doctors. I know many a good doctors that do not believe that they are God.
That's what the devil did with Jesus.
He does. He tries to tempt him with godlike powers. Kind of interesting that he attempts God with godlike powers. It's kind of like when people go, hey, I'm going to give you your phone. Funny, you're giving me a gift of which I already own. How novel. So, check this out. And we're kind of off and we're going to come back. Notice what he says to the serpent. You'll be on the dust. You'll be hated. Verse 15, you have the first prophecy of the coming of the Christ. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Many people see this as a messianic prophecy of the coming Christ. I think they're right. To the woman he says, I will multiply your pain in childbearing. And in your pain you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So now he shifted them from being co-equals to what? Subordinates. To Adam, because you listened to the voice of your wife, you have eaten the tree. And so here you go, brother. Some would say, well, see, she ate, and then she brought it to him. Okay. I'm not going to get bent out of shape one way or the other on this. Why? Because there are more arguments for silences. And cursed be the ground. In pain you shall eat all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles you will bring forth, and you shall eat plants of the field, and your sweat of your face, and you shall eat bread, and until the ground, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now here's the interesting thing about if the image of man, the actual physical representation of us is a physical rotation of God. Notice what he says to man here at the end. You were taken out of what? Dust, and to what you shall return. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that the image that we bear ourselves is the image of God, but our return state is what? Dust. Now there's something that happens here within the nature of man. There's a shift that occurs. We have communion with God, and it's a free communion with God, but now sin has entered into the world and has complicated that mess. And now God gives man certain toils. And so I think, yes, up until a certain point, God creates Adam and Eve. He creates them with the ability of a free moral decision. They make that, and from the moment of Genesis chapter 3 on, man, as Paul says later on as we will look in Romans chapter 5, because of the fall of man, man now has a taint, he has a stain, he has a bend towards the evil. And we see this as the story of Genesis moves along. And this is what we would call the doctrine of original sin. And so I think the Imago Dei now, while we still bear the image of God because we are living souls, and I think it is more spiritual than it is physical, because we are living souls. There's something unique about us that's different from the animals, because we all return to the dust, even the animals. But our spiritual insides do not cease to be, correct? We are now something unique. So I think that is more in line. But here's the thing. I'm willing to be wrong, and it could be the physical aspect. Why? Because the text, oddly enough, doesn't explicitly say. And folks, I brought my dictionary here that talks about it, and the discussion goes on for 5 pages. And this is the small discussion. So, and there's other dictionaries that I have that are much larger, and the discussion goes on for multiple pages. I think it's something that is within man becoming a living soul. King James, I think, accurately captures the translation best there. And man becomes a living soul, something unique about man. And so when the body dies, it returns back to dust, but the spirit does not. Notice it doesn't say, and the spirit will be annihilated.
The question is, where's the spirit going?
That's the point. Exactly. And this is why the Christ must come.
It's also why he kicked him out of the garden.
Is exactly why I kicked him out of the garden. Because now there is...
He did not want
Also, you have perfection in paradise, and now you have that coexisting with something that is now tainted. So he kicks them out. So that's one aspect of looking at. I think they're onto something there. I think that. Why don't we look at Isaiah 5:6? Or sorry, Isaiah 6:5. My dyslexia kicked in. See what Isaiah kind of says about that. And we'll go back to Genesis chapter. Well, I need somebody to look up Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. I need somebody to look up Isaiah 6:5 and Jeremiah 17:5. Genesis 9:6, Isaiah 6:5, Jeremiah 17:5. Who's got 9:6? Ms. Joyce?
Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image.
Okay. Still complicates the issue further, all right? If I strike man and he dies, man's been created in the image of God. It's an interesting conundrum, is it not? Now, it also could be the fact that the internal spirit of a man is part of that, or the physical aspect of a man. And so here's the thing, which is why I'm not overly dogmatic on this position, whether or not it's the physical attributes or the spiritual attributes. Still, nonetheless, striking man to where he dies ends up being what? It's a penalty of death, right? You have touched, because here's the thing, what have you dared do? Remember we talked about when Paul said, I, Paul, am sent by Christ, or through the authority of Christ. Paul is saying, or as a messenger, Paul is saying, I am an ambassador for Christ, if I, except for in current days. If you were to hit the ambassador of the United States and kill him, who have you really struck? The President of the United States and the military force behind him, correct? If I am the image bearer of God and I strike the image that bears God, or I strike the thing that bears God's image, who have I dared to hit? God himself. Which is why it carries with it the force of death. Which is why then God gives the command, you have now forfeited your right because you've dared, or your life, because you've dared to touch the thing you cannot do. So man bears something about his physicalness and his spiritualness that is innate to God. I think you could easily make the argument for the physical nature of man because of the physical nature of Christ. I think you can. I think you may easily make the argument for the spiritual nature of man because of Genesis chapter 2 and the man becoming a living soul. It's one of those questions I'll ask when I get there. Because the text says that if you strike a man, you die. So there's something unique about man, right? Because I have killed many an animal. Nowhere in the text does it say I die for killing animals, right? Which is why I find it interesting that people get very upset that I shoot deer, but yet they think it's okay for people to kill babies. Anyhow,
Well, there's a word used too that where God gave us dominion over the animal.
That's very unique. Man does possess dominion over creation, does he not? It's a very interesting point. And he doesn't just leave that there. There's other passages that give that point. Who's got Isaiah 6:5? Okay, Brother Walter.
Isaiah 6:5. Then I said, woe to me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and live among people of unclean lips, and because my eyes have seen the King and the Lord of hosts.
Okay. Every time you see an individual that has an interaction with God, they almost have a statement like this. What does that describe about the nature of man versus the nature of God? Because in Genesis chapter 1, did you ever see Adam and Eve go, oh no, I've seen God, I will surely die? There's something that has shifted in the nature of man. And notice what Isaiah says. This is Isaiah. This is God's prophet. Isaiah, I want you to do this. Very prolific writer, prophesies over a time span of multiple hundred years. Now, he doesn't live that long, but his prophecies go over multiple hundreds of years. And notice what he says when he runs to God. Woe to me, I am ruined, or I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips. I am corrupt, and I lived among corrupt people. Isaiah recognizes there's a change about something within man. You say, well, you're cherry picking some of your verses. I'm not. The BFM is doing it. I think they're on the right track with that because
It's a corporate confession as well as an individual.
it is, because he's talking about the sin of the nation itself, correct? Now here's the thing. Look at the nation of Israel, God's chosen people. Do they stay with God all the way through? Those folks wonder constantly. What's the hymn? Prone to wonder. Prone to leave the God I love. That's from a person that says he's redeemed. That's a constant problem with the heart of man. He wonders from the very thing that he wants. Okay, who's got Jeremiah 17:5. Okay?
Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord.
Okay? So who trusts in man whose heart turns away from the Lord, correct? So what is something about the nature of man and about the relationship he has with God? I got to pick other verses. This was in the BFM, so if when you're looking at the verses there, so I'm not cherry picking other verses.
Man continually turns away.
He continually runs, right? I am never shocked when my kids lie to me. Why? Because my mom and dad were never shocked when I lied to them. They just were fooled pretty good because I was a pretty good liar when I was a kid. I got out of detention a lot. But notice what happens. Let's look at Matthew 16:26.
What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul, and what shall a man get if he returns to his soul?
What is being talked about as being redeemed there? The body and the soul, or what? The soul. That's an interesting concept there, is it not? What will it gain a man to gain the whole world yet forfeits his own soul? Why is this important? Exactly. It's where you end up. And so there's something about the soul of man, there's something about man itself that has to be redeemed, right? If there's not something that has to be redeemed, Paul, when he writes in Romans chapter 5 and 1 Corinthians, let me see where it's at. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes these things out of nonsense. We'll jump around here for a minute here. Yeah, if you want to look at the section on Mars Hill, we're going to jump past that. We got bogged down a little bit with the Imago Dei, which is cool. The great thing about this type of discussion is I'm willing to chase the discussion where you want to go. And so, you know, I'm fine with chasing the discussion. If you're fine with chasing the discussion. Let's look at Romans chapter 1. Starting in verse 18. It's a long read. The BFM does not quote all of it. They only quote 19 through 32. And they do it just for brevity's sake. I like to read Romans chapter 1 almost in its entirety because Romans chapter 1 is a very unique passage. Romans chapter 1. Let me turn to it in my ESV. I've got it here. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Starting in verse 18. So what is man's natural inclination? To embrace truth or suppress truth? We are in the suppression of truth business. Because that which is known about God is evident within them. Richard Dawkins. What did you do? Well, I will ignore all the evidence that speaks about God and all of His great miracles, and therefore God doesn't exist because we know He doesn't exist because I've eliminated all the evidence of God existing because the one source that gives us God existence, it's not the only source. Pliny the Younger actually gives us citations about what the early Christians used to do, but we throw that out because clearly that is a contained source as well. Isn't that clever? For since the creation of the world, all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, His invisible attributes, His eternal power, His divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood that being understood through what has been made, so that they are without what? Excuse. Do people around the world have an excuse to say, I didn't know there's a God? No. It is evident that there is a God. This is why they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the incorruptible for an image. If you were here for Isaiah, the beautiful thing about the text that was constantly repeated in chapters 40 and 43, and I think 46, you go, you select a piece of wood, you cut it in thirds. You build a fire with 1/3. You cook your meal with another third, and you decorate the third to where it doesn't teeter-totter. Put gold on it, and you bow down and go, you are my God. In another passage it says you pick up your God and carry Him and set Him down. And if He's too big, you put Him on a cart and roll Him around. What a great kind of God. He's so all-powerful that He makes you move Him. Interesting concept, is it not? Probably couldn't. He might be able to suck up a water puddle if you threw him in there and he sucked up all the water and became waterlogged, but then you would need a bigger cart because he's heavier because he's got all the water in him. What a foolish little God. You got fat by drinking water. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, we've already read that, exchanging the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of what? Corruptible man. So now you got a problem with the Imago Dei being the form of man, right? Because you created the image in the form of the corruptible man. Or you could say in the original state with Adam and Eve, it was perfect, and that is the image he's talking about. That's the way most of the reformers go. Here, now man's form is corrupted. It's sinful. It's tainted.
They weren't corruptible. The first two weren't corruptible.
Exactly. That was my point. The first two were uncorrupted. Now man is corrupted, and so now we make the image of something that is corrupted. So, like I said, you can make the case here, but then you can make the case the first two were uncorrupted until they sinned. So it's a push. Again, it's a push on the argumentation. So,
Well, we were corrupted
from the time began. Romans chapter 5, if we get to it, we'll demonstrate that we're corrupted ever since Adam and Eve falls. There's nothing about us that makes a free moral decision. We now have a constant lean to the negative, to evil. That's right. So, the corruptible man, of birds, of four-footed animals, crawly creatures. Therefore God gave them over to the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored amongst them. They exchanged the what? The truth of God for a lie. Israel does this repeatedly. But not just Israel. Every other people groups on the face of the earth does this repeatedly. Why? Because we all descend from two people. And you say, well, okay, but let's say that's not true. Okay, well, if you look at the flood account, we all descend now from 8 people.
But those 8 people descended from the first 2 people.
Right, but my argument is, if you want to say, well, there was more than just 2 people, because there's an argument that, and it's a bad argument, but there's an argument that there were more than 2 people at the book of Genesis. Well, there's only 8 after the flood.
and they were hardly off the boat before they were sinning.
Yes, it didn't take them long. It didn't take them long. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They worshiped and served the creature rather than whom? The Creator. This, if you go back and read what Paul says at Mars Hill, this unknown God, I know who He is. And begins to, why? Because there at the Pantheon are all these gods.
That was so brilliant.
If people say Paul did not use logic, they apparently have not read Mars Hill's arguments. He used, you're right, he uses the Greek's logic against them, and he beats them at it. Look at verse 28. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to the depraved mind to do things which are not proper. The essence of man is God gives them over to a mind of depravity. We'll get in, we'll jump around. Drop down to 32. Although they know the ordinance of God, did Adam and Eve know the ordinance of God when they ate of the fruit?
Yes.
Instantaneously. They saw that they were naked and they were ashamed. Instantaneous. What happens when I sin? Do you ever feel good when you sin? I have never felt good about any of my sins. Except for maybe that time I ran that one person off the road and they died in a horrible car. No, I'm sorry. That's not true either. None of that's true. It's only satire. Sorry, I had to tell the camera that because it doesn't know. They know the ordinances, but yet when they do it, they know they're doing wrong. You watch that in kids, right? You hear a crash. You go look. Is the kid there boldly standing upon the thing he broke, chest puffed out, smiling big? Look what I just did. Or are they hiding somewhere? Or pointing at someone else that doesn't speak English or speak yet? Right? I didn't do it, it was him. And you're looking at a baby and a bouncy who has no real form other than to use a bouncy. That those who practice such things are what? Worthy of death. Man has been born, man has been created, and man is under a sentence of death. They not only do the same, but what's this? Check this out. This tells you the depravity of the heart. But they also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Look at our current cultural problem. It is not enough that you simply embrace what is being pushed down it. You must now give approval to it, or you're a homophobe, or a bigot, or you're a racist, or you go on down the list of things they throw at people to say, hey, this is nuts. The whole debate over whether or not the stars and bars should be removed. I think it's a silly debate. We have ISIS drowning people and burning Christians alive, and yet we're worried about a flag. I tell people, grow up and quit trying to be offended. The offended culture tells me that you are neither secure enough in your belief in Jesus Christ, which you claim you have, or the fact that you're secure enough in your belief as a human being that a piece of fabric can cause you great emotional distress. Be a big boy, put on your big boy britches, and go out and face the world. Now, granted, that may not be very popular, but there, I said it! I'm looking at the camera because the camera doesn't know. I'll probably get all hate mail. Send it to my web address, www.idon'tgiveacrap. There. There. Romans chapter 5. And we looked at Romans chapter 5 on a Sunday morning, right? Check this out. This is what Paul says of our state. While we were still helpless or sinful, could go either way, at the right time, Christ died for whom? The ungodly, or us. Well, we'll hardly die for a righteous man, but perhaps for a good man, someone will even dare to die. That's a pretty good point, right? But God demonstrates His own love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Other passages, I believe it's in Galatians, it says while we were enemies. Ephesians, I think, uses the same phrase.
It goes on down to 10, and it says we're while we were enemies.
Yep. While we were enemies. While, and it doesn't mean, like I've said before, we unfriended God on Facebook. It is we are hostile combatants against God. While we were engaged in open, hostile warfare, the love of the Father compels the Son to die upon the cross against people that are yelling at the foot, or to Pilate, crucify Him, crucify Him, crucify Him, crucify Him, while we were thumbing our nose and going, He dies for us. The unregenerated state, the sinful nature, the thing that bears the image that has now mocked the very image, comes to die to restore the image. and reconcile. And see, here's the thing about the nature of man. It has a taint, it has a slant, I do not have to teach my children to be bad. I have to teach my children to be good. Which is why I know what most people say when they say man has free will, I use the phraseology that man has a will that acts freely. My will is subject to that of sin. And therefore, at times, while I actively act willfully, there are times when I actually am a free moral agent, but most of the time I am pulled by an irresistible pull towards sin. If I am pulled by an irresistible pull towards sin, am I a morally free agent? No. Because morally free means I can make a decision that is morally unhindered. And I am not morally unhindered. I am pulled with a pull towards the sinful. I can act freely, sure, but I am not a morally free agent. Adam and Eve, absolutely, morally free agents. And notice what two morally free agents did. They sinned. So, again, even in that state, being morally free agents, what ended up happening? End result, they sinned. I am not a morally free agent. What is my end result of my very nature? I sin. That argument doesn't get you anywhere. It's a cul-de-sac argument. You go in and you just spin around. Nevertheless, death reigned where? From Adam until Moses. It continues to reign, or even under those who have not sinned in the offense like Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. So it goes back, brother, to is it the image or is it the spirit? And again, the text kind of gives you the thing that it's the image, but then Matthew says it dies for the soul, right? And so you have this tension. And here's the thing. My answer to you was what? Yes. Jump down to 17. For if by the transgression of one death reigned through one, much more to those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will life reign through the one, Jesus Christ. So then, through one transgression resulted to condemnation to all men. Paul is saying here, when Adam sins, we are present. We are conspirators. You say, how can that be? We're not even there yet. Because if we were there, we would all be going, hee hee hee, let me have a bite. It's essentially what Paul's argument is. Resulted to condemnation to all men. All men. Every one of us. Even so, through one act of righteousness, there resulted justification to all men. Now, a lot of people like to grab this verse and go, see, salvation comes. And remember, the three responses to salvation: universalism, legalism, sacerdotalism. What would you think this one falls into? Sacerdotalism, legalism, or universalism? Universalism. All men. So right here, all men are saved. Is that what he's saying? Or is the opportunity for salvation to all men is now there? The opportunity. I believe that the will of God, the death of Christ, is capable of saving all people. Its application are to those who are His.
People get hung up on the fact that it says men instead of mankind.
That's right. It does. Paul is using, just like Adam in the book, in Hebrew, Adam can be a personal pronoun talking about Adam. It can also be talking about man. And then it can also be utilized to talk about mankind. You know how you tell the difference between them? Sometimes it's simply context of the passage. Sometimes it is the presence of the definite article, but not always the case. The definite article doesn't always have to be there. That would be the for verse 21. So that as sin reigned in death, even so grace reigns through righteousness. Again, you have the transmission back. You have the taint from Genesis chapter 3 to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. To our current state. Let's see what time I'm at, because I keep taking my glasses off. I have 32. Let me wrap this up. Drop down to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 20, and we'll read 21, and then we'll look at a little bit of some of Ephesians, and then we'll call it a day. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. For since by man came death, or by a man came death, by a man came the resurrection of the dead. As for in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive. 1 Corinthians backs up what Paul says in Romans. You may debate that Paul writes other things, but notice what most New Testament scholars say. No one debates that Paul writes 1 Corinthians. Let's look at the state of man. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1. You were dead in your trespasses and sin. Verse 2, you formerly walked according to the curse of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. That is according to the will of Satan. Which is why I believe that a believer cannot be possessed. Once he is a believer in Jesus Christ, he can be oppressed, but he cannot be possessed. Why? Because in your current state as a believer, you are indwelled with the third person of the triune God. However, before you were a believer, it's very easy for you to be possessed. Why? You were owned by the prince of the power of the air. You were his. So is your nature in an unregenerate state yours as a morally free agent? No. You are walking according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them we too all formerly lived in the lust of the flesh and the indulgence of the desires of the flesh and of the mind. We were by nature children of wrath. But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even while we were dead in our transgression, made us alive together through Jesus Christ, for by grace you have been saved. This word dead here, there's two words in Greek that represents dead. One is thanatos, one is nekros. Thanatos is someone who has just died. They are thanatos. Somebody at a crime scene gets shot, their vitals go flat. And then like Jack Bauer, they grab a needle, shove it in his heart, pump it full of adrenaline, pow, with the paddles, and now, bam, he's alive. That's thanatos. Still capable of being revived. This word is nekros. This is where we get the phrase necrotic. What is necrotic flesh? Rotted flesh. What is a necrotic body?
Been there 10 days.
Is there anything in it that has any spark of life? No. You are dead. You are necrotic. And while you were necrotic, just like Lazarus in the tomb, when Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus comes forth. Why? Jesus makes Lazarus alive. So here, Christ makes you alive. Why? In your fallen state, you're necrotic. I am at 5 minutes past, according to Mickey's hand up there, and according to this one right here. You want any questions? Because I mean, I got texts. I can keep going. There's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them here. Let me read the statement of what the Baptist Faith and Message says about us and see if we kind of hit on this. Man is a special creation of God. Did we answer that question? Made in his own image. Quasi answered that question, right? The answer is yes, in my opinion. Don't you love how uncommittal I am there? Created them both male and female. Yes. As the crowning work of his creation, absolutely. What is unique about us that isn't unique about animals? We are souls, which is why when an animal dies, guess where it goes? Right in the ground. Now, look, I have no illusions. If there's animals in heavens, it will not alter my theology one way or the other. And okay, great. Pow. So what? In the beginning, man was innocent of sin and was endowed by his Creator with the freedom of choice. Absolutely. By his free choice, man sinned against God and brought sin into the human race. Did we make that point? Through temptation of Satan, man's transgression, transgressed the command of God, fell from his original innocence, whereby his posterity inherited a nature and environment inclined towards sin. Did we cover that? Romans chapter 5, Galatians chapter 15. Therefore, as soon as they are capable of moral action, they become transgressors. Some denominations will argue this point. Baptists do not. They are under condemnation. under the penalty of death. Only by the grace of God can bring man unto his holy fellowship and enable man to fulfill the creative purpose of God. Absolutely. Sacredness of the human personality is evident in that God created man in his very image. We kind of covered that. And in that, Christ died for man. Therefore, every person of every race possesses full dignity and is worth and respect of Christian love. Translation: there is neither free nor slave, Jew nor Gentile, male or female. What do you think? Questions before we close it up, wrap it up? Any questions at all? All the verses are there. I think I printed them off with the verses there, correct? Or with the source annotations for the verses there, correct? Okay. No questions? Let's close out with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to look at the Baptist faith and message. And we, as humans, and for the responsibility we bear as transgressors, for the penalty that we have created. Man, if it had stopped right there, what a horrific, tragic story. Dawkins would be correct. Have you seen your holy book? Your God is mean. But yet, when we read the totality of this story, we see a loving God who willfully sends a Son, a sinless, perfect sacrifice to be slaughtered in our sinful, wretched state. Gross miscarriage of justice. To restore the unique relationship we had in the garden. That we long for the hope of its full restoration when we go to meet Him in glory. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for the sending of the Son, for the power of the Holy Spirit to indwell within us, to where we have a taste of that which is to come and the future hope of that event. We ask for your blessing upon us. We ask for your continued strengthening of us corporately as a body and for those who are not among our presence this evening, and ask that you continue to strengthen us personally in our walk with each other and ourselves and our God. We ask for all these things in your name we pray. Amen. All right. I know it went a little long.